28 Years Later is officially arrived, directed by Danny Boyle, returning from the first film, written by Alex Garland, also returning from the first film, starring Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Alfie Williams, Jodie Comer, and Ralph Fiennes. Set 28 years, literally, after the initial outbreak in 2002 from the first film, the British Isles are in an indefinite state of quarantine, where young Spike, played by Alfie Williams, goes on his first mission with his father to get his first kill of an infected on the mainland of the UK. And it's basically a coming-of-age story, albeit in a very dark way for a 12-year-old. And actually, I would say learns the true meaning of what it means to be a man, not in the stereotypical manly, masculine type of way that certain people would be tempted to give their young sons. I was going to do a video on 28 weeks. If you saw my review of 28 Days Later, I said I was going to do a video on 28 weeks. With the timing, I decided to just go right for the throat on this one and go for 28 years. But to sum it up, I thought it was perfectly fine, but it was definitely a step down from the first one. I liked seeing how the military and the government were trying to stamp out the infection by wiping out as much people as possible, by shooting them from high-rise buildings, bombing them, which is similar to what Tess said to Ellie as they're walking through the abandoned areas of Boston outside the QZ. But the humanity with the characters I found to be very one-note and vapid, save from the characters of Rose Byrne and Jeremy Renner. It also looked very clean in comparison to the other two, to the point where it didn't really feel grounded. It almost looked like it was shot on a soundstage. The movie also hinted at the end that the virus was starting to spread all throughout Europe, and possibly the entire world. Now, 28 years later, the virus has been contained to the British Isles, where Ireland and the UK are in permanent quarantine, being patrolled by NATO forces. Spike is able to get his first kill, but is compelled to try to do something to help his sick mother. And with spoilers, because I can't talk about this without addressing some stuff that happens in here, because there's a lot to talk about, and if I try to dance around it, I'm going to be really bad at it. But here we go. The film opens in the year 2002 with these young kids somewhere in the Scottish Highlands watching a broadcast of the Teletubbies. Oh my god. Talk about a throwback, but that was such a dumb show. There's better kid shows that were on at the time. When I was younger-ish, I was getting into my teen years in 2002. Oh, God. I'm not even going to go further than that. Look at me deliberating about Teletubbies. Way to remind me, 28 series. But as we're watching the TV, these kids are clearly unsettled by something, and we hear a lot of chaos going on from inside the house. This young boy Jimmy barely survives by the skin of his teeth when the infected start to come in and infecting the children and his mother and all the other adults in the house. He runs into the nearby church where his father, who is a fundamentalist preacher, gives him his cross and is devoured by the infected, and Jimmy hides in a ventilation shaft under the floor. And it all comes back into play later on. But we'll get to that. Then the film cuts to 28 years later, in the middle of this island, which is off the coast of the mainland of the UK. Spike is growing up in this isolated community, very similar to Jackson in The Last of Us, where his father, played by Aaron Taylor-Johnson, helping him grow up to become an efficient killer and a hunter. Everybody celebrates the fact that he's going to get his first kill, and along with us, the audience, we learn that there's certain things that you have to keep in mind from when they get point A to point B, and in reverse. They can only go when it's low tide and not during high tide because the water will be too steep. And if someone were to run off to the mainland, they don't go after them because nobody goes on the mainland unless you absolutely have to. It's kind of a callback to the rules that the survivors tell Jim when he first wakes up after the outbreak. So they go to the mainland of the UK where they see some infected nearby, and Spike gets his first opportunity to kill infected. Some are really overweight and bloated and really heavy, while others are lanky and thin, and they just run like crazy madmen, or just like the infected in The Last of Us. And rather than just going off crazy instincts when they see a prey nearby, we learn that they've adapted, and they've found other ways of hunting their food over the past nearly 30 years. If I'm remembering this correctly, director Danny Boyle suggested that the infected got so overwhelmed that they eventually starved, so they decided to conserve their energy and only use it when it's absolutely necessary. But just like with the first film, 28 Days Later, we see moments of beauty throughout these sequences, where they see a pack of deer running in a stampede form. Both Spike and his father are in awe of what they're seeing, and it's moments like that where you see that this world is indeed worth saving, that life does eventually go on, even with all this destruction and chaos surrounding them. So Spike gets his first kill when he sees an infected hanging upside down, and he's got some branding letters on his body and a plastic bag over his head, and just at the right moment he shoots the infected with an arrow right in its head as his father instructs him to. Seeing the bond between Spike and his father Jamie, very similar obviously to Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us, teaching him how to be efficient at survival and know exactly where to hit your targets when they're coming at you. But just like in the first movie where they are told not to go out at night, inevitably they're forced to go out at night because it's the only time that they might be able to get a clean getaway. But it puts themselves at a greater risk when an alpha infected is lurking around nearby, another sign of the evolution of the rage virus, where it's basically acting as the leader of a pack of infected. I guess you could also say that the alpha is kind of like the bloater in the Last of Us series, and how it is able to decapitate its enemies or its prey. And there's at least a couple moments where they show it. It does not hold back as far as its violence and gore. Even the Last of Us TV show didn't get that close to showing that brutality. But we also see a moment of beauty where we see the stars at night, without all the light pollution that would be filtering the skies otherwise, with civilization going on its usual routine. But it's mixed in with a scary scenario of an alpha infected charging right at them. Spike and Jamie survive, and they celebrate Spike's first kill, and his father puts on this really big show in a very drunken stupor that his first adventure was actually a lot more grander than it actually was. But Spike sees his father having an affair with this other woman, given that his wife is bedridden, and quickly becomes disillusioned with his father, not just with his extramarital affair, but how he hypes up his son to be the greatest warrior that's ever lived. Also on that note, there's quite a bit of stock footage that's used in here, as far as young men being trained in the British Army during both World Wars, and how you go from boyhood to manhood. They even show footage from, I guess, medieval movies, like, I guess, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or some other movies like that, I don't really know, echoing the heritage of the British people in the ways that they thought it was appropriate for young people. Similar to the first RoboCop, where we see all these commercials playing, which is a subtle commentary on capitalism. And I guess in this situation, you could chalk it up to Spike learning that everything that he was taught is not exactly what he wants to be. His father's idea of masculinity is not something that he wants to inherit, and when he calls him on it, it gets pretty tense between the two. And to rewind the clock, when they're on the mainland, they see this fire in the distance, and Jamie tells Spike that there's this doctor who's actually really crazy. They saw him burning all these dead bodies, and they just ran away, thinking that this guy was a crazy person. But as it turns out, when Spike talks to another person who is the caretaker of his mother, and with his mother's deteriorating condition getting worse and worse by the day, he decides to take a chance and go find that doctor on the mainland. And I know I'm not the only one to mention this, but the fact that they shot this movie on iPhone cameras most of the time to give that sort of blend of grandiose spectacle and a found footage-like nature, that was a pretty impressive feat to pull off, and Danny Boyle manages to put it to some really great use, playing into the notion that this movie is set during the modern era, at least, I guess, 2030 something, if anything. And they make it clear in the movie that the rest of the world managed to stave off the rest of the virus by quarantining the British Isles. So eventually when Spike and his mother run into that NATO soldier, he talks about delivery people, Facebook, social media, and all the other stuff that you and I would know about. It goes completely over his head. But inevitably, Spike's mother hears this call of a nearby infected, which turns out to be an infected woman who's about to give birth. With the help of the others, she manages to give birth to the baby, and they cut the umbilical cord right before the infection can set in with the baby. Again, just like Ellie's mother cutting the umbilical cord in season 1, episode 9, implying that's how Ellie became immune to the cordyceps. Eric, with his survival instincts kicking in, because he hasn't gotten used to this world, he's about ready to kill all three of them, and then the alpha male comes in and viciously, violently kills him. But then they're saved by Ralph Fiennes' character, who turns out to be the doctor they're looking for. And rather than killing the infected, he uses them as a form of defense to protect his own little settlement, known as the Bone Temple. Seeing in the trailers, I thought this was going to be some crazy person who had this obsession with collecting skulls or whatever, but it turns out that he values human life and he's paying respect to the dead. Given that he was a doctor, he took an oath to do no harm, and he's doing exactly that. And he's not actually a crazy person. Well, maybe you could argue just a little bit off his rocker with all this skull and bones stuff that he's got in his settlement. People are going to do crazy things when the societal norms are gone in the apocalypse, so if they have it in them somewhere, it's bound to come out in some shape or form. But since he doesn't have the medical techniques and technology to diagnose Spike's mother, from what he gathers from examining her, he determines that she has terminal cancer. And this is basically the climax of the whole movie, rather than just some big zombie battle that we would normally see in a story like this. This is where Spike truly grows up emotionally, becoming a man. His father taught him all the stuff that he needs in order to survive, but what he learns is compassion, humanity, and love from his mother and from the doctor. And I have to mention, Ralph Fiennes' performance is just beautifully effective in the ways that's required. We already know how great this guy is, but he seamlessly fits in with the 28 Days series just fine. But throughout these scenes, we see Spike caring for his mother when she's experiencing all these confused episodes because of the cancer taking its hold on her. But there's one moment where she asks him, "Does your father ever get playful with you like I just did?" And he says no. His father, Jamie, is very stoic and a traditional manly man. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but if he was going to learn true emotional intelligence, he wasn't going to get it from his father. Mothers are the ones who really teach their children about compassion and kindness. Fathers can and have done that too. I'm not saying it's never happened, but really it comes from the mother. And I can speak from my own experience as well. Thanks, Mom. But this whole sequence where he is being carried in his mother's arms right before she goes out to be euthanized, and him carrying the skull up to the top of that mountain that Ralph Fiennes' character built. I almost started to cry. It was out of control. And again, I really love that this is not just some big boss-like battle or a big battle against infected. I'm not against that stuff in a zombie movie or a zombie story, but it's really a prime example of what apocalypse stories are all about. I mean, if you were to take apocalypse movie or zombie movie 101, it's not about the infected or the zombies. It's about the people and how they deal with this situation. Ironically, the doctor that Jamie wrote off as a crazy person turned out to be more of a father figure to Spike than his own father could ever be to him.
You didn't see that coming?
I know. Couldn't resist. So Spike returns the baby back to his home and leaves a note for his father, telling him that he's named the baby after his mother, and that he's going to return when he's ready by learning to survive on his own on the mainland. His father Jamie tries to go after him, but due to the high tide, he can't. But let's talk about the ending. This was very, very out of place, tonally. Spike is hanging out on the scenic route where a group of infected come at him, and just when you think he's about to die, the stranger with long blonde hair and an upside-down cross around his neck sends his goons to tackle the infected, and it comes off very Power Ranger-like, or almost like Mortal Kombat, where they treat violence like it's a video game. This guy offers Spike a chance to become pals with him, and he seems to accept it. And we learn that this guy is named Jimmy, who's the same boy that we met in the beginning of the movie. That cross is from his father, and the cross being upside down symbolizes his turn to evil. And when I was watching the sequence, seeing that actor, I thought, wait, who is that guy? He looks familiar. And I looked him up, and I went, oh my god. That's Remick from the movie Sinners, and he was Louis Zamperini in Unbroken. Based on how this ending goes, there's clearly going to be some kind of sequel. I knew there was going to be one, and apparently it's already been shot, and it's set to be released in January of next year. There's clearly a lot more stuff that you could do with Ralph Fiennes with that bone temple. I'm wondering if there's going to be some sort of big battle between the settlement and the infected, should they try to see if they could get onto the island. I don't know. And apparently Cillian Murphy is going to come back in the sequel next year. That is pretty huge. Be very curious to see what they do with him. I would say 28 Years Later is a worthy sequel. I personally think that 28 Days Later is a little bit better than this one, mostly because the ending kind of tanks it a little bit for me, 28 Years Later, but it's leagues better than the second one, 28 Weeks. Because ultimately what it excels at is the humanity of the characters. Even if this movie has a lot more of a modern feel to it, it's almost like Danny Boyle never left the series. And I don't know about any of you guys, I consider that to be a plus. So really, that's all I have for you guys on 28 Years Later. Thank you so much for watching. Comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie and what's your favorite in the series. I personally would say maybe it's this one, but it's really, really close. Ever so slightly right behind or maybe above 28 Days Later. Gotta think about that one. Are you excited for the sequel coming up? How do you feel about that ending? Either way, let's just try to have a civilized conversation down below because you know, with how the internet goes, it gets a little bit crazy out there. Thanks again, guys. Hit the like and subscribe buttons if you'd like to see more from me. And as always, see you in the next one.